Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's program to learn about Harvard's Intellectual Vitality Initiative, a program designed to build a culture of civil discourse and open dialogue throughout Harvard community. Today's program is co-sponsored by the Harvard Alumni for Free Speech, Fair for All, and the Council for Academic Freedom at Harvard. Harvard Alumni for Free Speech is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit group of Harvard alumni dedicated to protecting and promoting free speech, academic freedom, and viewpoint diversity throughout the Harvard community. Fair for All is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization committed to challenging threats to civil liberties from identity-based practices. Its core aim is to protect and defend freedom of speech and equal protection rights guaranteed by the First and 14th Amendments. The Council on Academic Freedom is a Harvard-wide, faculty-led group dedicated to promoting academic freedom, civil discourse, and viewpoint diversity at Harvard. It now has 200 members drawn from all of Harvard schools. I'm John Evangelakos, the president of Harvard Alumni for Free Speech, and I have the great honor of moderating a truly superb panel today. I'd like to start our discussion as soon as possible, so my introductions will, by necessity, shortchange our panel members by not listing all of their impressive accomplishments and credentials. Here goes. Danielle Allen is the James Bryant Conant University Professor at Harvard University, the director of the Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation at the Kennedy School, and the director of the Democratic Knowledge Project Learn at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is, among many other things, a professor of political philosophy, ethics, and public policy. Danielle was also one of the founding members of the Council on Academic Freedom, and she is a member of the Intellectual Vitality Faculty Advisory Board. She also wrote a great article in The Atlantic last April, the New Social Compact for Higher Education. I'm sorry, the New Social Contract for Higher Education, and she's put it in the chat for those of you who want to read it. Ned Hall. Ned is the Norman Vuilleumier Professor of Philosophy at Harvard University, and is known for his expertise on metaphysics, philosophy of science, and epistemology. Ned is also one of the founders of the Council of Academic Freedom and serves as one of its co-presidents. Ned is also the chair of the Intellectual Vitality Faculty Advisory Board. Ned also teaches the general education course at Harvard, Reclaiming Arguments. And he's offered to provide any of the materials to any one of you who is interested. So feel free to look him up or to shoot me an email and I'll forward it to him. We have Monica Harris on as well. Monica is the executive director of Fair for All. Monica spent more than a decade as a business and legal affairs executive at Walt Disney Television, NBC Universal Media, and Viacom Media Networks. In 2011, Monica abandoned corporate life and moved with her family to Montana, where she launched her own law firm. Monica is a TED speaker, author, and blogger who advocates for balanced, common-sense solutions to systemic problems based on our shared values and goals. In her new book, The Illusions of Division, Monica recounts her personal journey across the racial and political divide, where she discovers that America isn't nearly as divided as we're led to believe. And we have Ari Kohn. Ari is a senior at Harvard College, where she is studying a focus field in trust in higher education through a joint concentration in philosophy and social studies. Ari is also the co-founder and former co-chair of the Intellectual Vitality Student Board and previously served as a fellow during Intellectual Vitality's formative stages. Her senior thesis explores the recent emergence of civic thought programs across American higher education. She is also a research assistant for Danielle Allen's Task Force on Civic Strength in Higher Education. So I think with that, truly great panel. I'd like us to sort of get started as soon as possible. If you have questions, please write them into the chat. I'm going to, which you can access to the bottom of your screen. I'm going to monitor it during the course of our conversation, and I'll try to work in questions into our discussion. So anyways, so let's get started. So intellectual vitality. I'm going to, I guess, ask maybe Danielle or Ned. They're probably, because they were there at the what is it, and how did it come about? I don't know if one of you wants to jump for that. Danielle, how about you?
I was going to invite Ned because he's really the founder. Well, I mean,
Okay,
he's the true founder, so he should really speak
there you
about
are,
it.
Well,
Ned.
I'm happy to like fill in a bit of the origin story. So 5.5 years ago, a little over 5.5 years ago, in the beginning of the fall term when we were all teaching on COVID, I was teaching an online version of this course, Reclaiming Argument, and I got to know some of the students in that class fairly well, and some of them reached out to me partly because of the content of the course. The course is very much about building the skills needed to have kind of serious, good faith, curiosity driven engagement across disagreement. And some of the students in that course like talked to me about how they were feeling disappointed in their experience at Harvard. They'd come hoping to have take advantage of the wide number of different viewpoints and the fact that those viewpoints are held by extremely bright, talented, ambitious young people as a resource, as a place where they could really engage and have stimulating conversations. And as one student put it when I asked, like, so have you been able to have those conversations? And he said, well, after pausing, well, with carefully vetted friends. So what they very quickly encountered was that there were all sorts of obstacles, mostly kind of social obstacles. In fact, trying to get clear on what those obstacles are is a really interesting challenge. But at any rate, those conversations over the course of the year expanded out, not just with me, but with like among students themselves, and ended the following spring in an outreach effort to our dean of the college, Rakesh Khurana, like, can the college do something about this? And it was in those meetings that the term intellectual vitality got coined, because Rakesh's thought, which was a good one, was that captures in a positive way the kind of aspect of the culture that we feel is missing or is not strong enough at Harvard and that we really want to nurture, and is a better label for what we're after than something like free speech. It's more like, what do we want to do with free speech? We want to do something positive and interesting with it. And so it was really a very much ground up effort, so bottom up effort from the students. And I would say, and maybe this is where we should shift over to Ari, it really started kicking into gear a few years later when um, um, Amanda Kleber, our Dean of Undergraduate Education, really made a very concerted effort to empower the students to not just talk amongst themselves about what they wanted, but to give them resources to pursue it. And that was I guess fall of 2024, the official launch of the Student Advisory Board. But Ari, you can maybe speak to what immediately predated that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that that's a really helpful overview. And what I would add to that is that um, it almost felt like we had reached this point where students had a very sort of transactional relationship to their education and to Harvard as an institution. And it was almost this like one way relationship where the students are getting everything, but it isn't clear what the student's responsibility is to uphold or promote a culture of, or an academic culture of engagement in the classrooms, in their extracurriculars, in their residential colleges, or in their houses, sorry. And so I think that if intellectual vitality was really going to work and it was going to be a cultural shift, it couldn't be this sort of top down imposed sort of tagline. It really had to be something that the students accepted as their own, that they saw that it wasn't a rule. It was something that was a genuine joy, and that they wanted to have organically. And a lot of people it was almost this like failure of imagination to know exactly what was missing, but to really put sometimes having a term like intellectual vitality captures something that everyone sort of agrees has been missing. And I think that that was what intellectual vitality helped to do so through the work of the Student Advisory Board, working with the Faculty Advisory Board. We tried to really give students to say, you don't actually need to necessarily, it's not, I mean, there's skill acquisition that comes along with this, but everyone kind of innately knows how to do this. It really is about understanding one another, and taking for granted one another's best intentions and treating them as partners in a conversation. And once you have that experience, it is really so organic and so wonderful that it sort of spreads. But it was really about crystallizing that and having students accept that as something that they really wanted out of their education.
That it sounds great, and truly at a very high level. Everyone should take joy in that. But maybe for those of us who didn't have the benefit of all that planning and implementation, what exactly is intellectual vitality today? I mean, who gets to participate? And it's not a course, right? maybe just sort of outline for for us, the people who are watching, what it actually comprises. Maybe Ari, I don't know, Ari, maybe you can kick that off. I'm sure there are probably a lot of perspectives here. So.
Yeah, well, I can give two concrete examples. One is sort of an outside of the classroom example, and one of them is an inside of the classroom example. The first one that comes to mind was an event that was hosted and run by Intellectual Vitality as a collaboration between the student board and the faculty board last spring on Harvard's adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And this was a panel where it was a very small, informal, we capped it at 30 students, and it was under Chatham House rule, which means that you can say general things that were said during the session, but not attribute them to any specific person. So we kind of covered for the sort of some people's fear that what they said would be projected beyond who was in the room. So we had around 30 students, and we had 3 panelists. One was the director of Harvard Hillel, one was Jeannie Sue Gerson at the law school, and Ben Idelson at the law school. And I had this experience. I mean, it was the intensity in that room of people who cared so much about this issue. And it really came down to this question of what are the limits and conditions of academic freedom. So we had this amazing panel, and in it, people were disagreeing. Students were asking questions. We had panelists who've, vehemently disagreed. And at the end, I had 2 separate students come up to me independently. And I knew that they had very, very separate, different, stridently opposed views. One of them said to me, and actually, they both said, where was the other side? Where were the extremists? Why weren't they in the room? And it was so fascinating because I knew them to be both people who, if they knew, like they were what they thought the other person, when they saw the other person in their full sort of being in the room expressing a view, it was very hard to project this sort of fanaticism onto the other side. So that was sort of one example of an opportunity when having a conversation in person and putting those, like, disagreeing with a person, not just an idea, was really powerful. Okay, so that's one example. And then the other example from the classroom, and I'm going to maybe embarrass Professor Allen, is that I took Professor Allen's ancient philosophy class in the fall. And on the first class, she asked us all to do a survey that was anonymous, and we were asked to basically list or to cite a puzzle about our contemporary world that we wonder about, and then the emotions associated with that puzzle, and then the value we hold that is most associated, that draws us to wonder about this puzzle. And then she projected all of our answers on the screen, anonymized, and it was almost like, everyone just sort of gasped when they saw the room was completely captivated when they saw the variety and the care for these issues. But then also there was this sort of tacit understanding that when we would read these ancient texts, what we would be doing had very high stakes, because we were asking these fundamental questions that were deeply tied to our own values, but that also through our discussions and the pluralism in the room, that our puzzles and values would be challenged and might change. And this created this electric energy, the raw material, the raw disagreement that would create the preconditions for this class. So those are 2 sort of examples of intellectual vitality, I think, in action in the classroom and outside of it.
Well, Danielle, I guess Ari has turned it over to you. So
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful description, Ari. Thank you so much. I think, we've chatted about it some, though I don't think I've heard you fully describe that particular exercise. What you articulated is exactly what my hope for it was. So it means a lot to understand that it actually did work in the classroom in that way. That's a big deal for a teacher to have that kind of feedback. So thank you very much for that. And yes, this is, we come into these conversations about intellectual vitality from a lot of different axes of concern. I think that's an important thing to register. So there are, of course, the sort of academic freedom concerns or the free speech concerns. Those are not exactly identical, but of course they overlap. And those are concerns that are about a sort of sense of intolerance, making it hard for people to fully articulate their points of view. Then there are another set of concerns about serious intellectual engagement. We've all read all the articles about how busy Harvard students are, how many extracurriculars they carry, how oriented they are to career prospects outside the university, sort of from day one. And so that is another kind of muffling phenomenon that dampens the power of the classroom. And then there's a third thing that I would also put on the table, which is the fact that people come from such a huge diversity of experiences to our campus. I mean, it really is extraordinary when you walk into a classroom and you try to read all the names, and you have so much trouble pronouncing, honestly, a lot of the names, because they're just from all over the world, from all over the country, from so many different kinds of family backgrounds, experiences, demographic backgrounds, religions, faiths, as well as viewpoints. So there's a whole kit and caboodle of human pluralism is really present. And that pluralism is incredibly rich. It's an opportunity. So Harvard has actually for a long time known this about human pluralism in all of its dimensions. So I'm not just talking about race or gender. Those are part of the story, but again, religion and viewpoint and the like. But what has gotten challenging for the institution is how to activate the assets that everybody brings to the table into sort of maximally productive mutual learning and clarifying disagreements, doing that respectfully, learning how to kind of hold disagreements and tensions even as you go forward learning together. So that third sort of, that's like sort of like the anxiety worry. Like there's a suppression worry, there's the distraction worry, and then there's the anxiety worry. And all three of those things have been kind of dampening what happens in the classroom. So for me, intellectual vitality is about getting rid of all of those worries simultaneously. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's kind of funny. I think it sort of turns out not to be super hard. You just have to really sort of center that energy of the intellectual experience. I think that's what I really appreciate about the intellectual vitality framing. Is precisely that it is centering that sort of positive energy of true intellectual work. And then, of course, we recognize what are the hindrances to doing that work, those three concerns I mentioned. And then you learn different practices for sort of removing those barriers. So the activity that Ari described was one in which, yes, I want people to see the pluralism in the space, and then from the beginning set norms around how we're going to interact with that pluralism. So the one other little detail I'll share that Ari didn't mention about the survey is that the very first question on the survey is, are you willing to share your views in ways that prove your trustworthiness to the other humans in the room? And you have to say yes or no. And if you say no, you don't get to go on to the rest of the survey. And I will say, I do have some classes where sometimes people check no in that one. And I don't exactly know what they're thinking, but they check no. Though that number is decreasing, actually, I will say, with each passing year. And then, though, what that means is that even as you're answering and you are thinking about your own puzzle and what you bring to the table, you have to also be other directed at the same time and ask yourself the question of how do I express even, what might be a hard point of view or challenging perspective for some in a way that still communicates my trustworthiness to the other person. I think that yields what sort of Ari described in that room, the panel where the two students, neither of whom they thought there should be an extremist in the room, and there did turn out to be one because everybody had already bought into a norm of sort of proving mutual trustworthiness in the space. So at any rate, that's long-winded, but yes, sets of great concerns come together, and intellectual vitality unlocks all of them.
John, can I just add something just to go back to your original question about what is it? Because I think this might be important for the people listening in too. Of course, there's an institutional side to this. So the Student Advisory Board, for example, has a pot of money. It can fund initiatives. People can make grant proposals to it for intellectual vitality focused initiatives. And that's been important. It's been a place for the students on the board to develop a shared sense of what exactly it is they're trying to promote. And that's already, I think, had some impact. And there are other sort of initiatives around the university, like Eric Bierbaum heads up like a civil discourse group too that does various things. But I think one thing that both Ari and Danielle were bringing out is that it is helping us as a community to have this shared vocabulary, because it allows us to think about things, even for example, how we're going to deal with grade inflation at Harvard. Without the intellectual vitality in the water, it would be easy for faculty to think oh, we just haven't been, tough or honest enough in our grading, and we need to fix that, and then we'll be done. But in fact, the way the best conversations around that are going is really framed around well, what kind of learning community do we want? And in what way is grade inflation both a cause of and a symptom of obstacles to achieving that. And once we're clear on that, it becomes very clear, for example, that even if the college passes, the FAS passes this proposal to cap A's at 20% plus 4 and introduce some other things, that has to be the first step in some ongoing project of getting faculty to rethink how they approach academics. So more of us are thinking along the lines that Danielle just articulated. And it helps a great deal to have intellectual vitality as something we can point to as an aspiration and something where we're collectively working out exactly what we do and should mean by that.
That's great. I'm going to have a question. I want to bring Monica in just a minute to talk about how this applies to sort of more, take it outside of Harvard for a minute. But just to help me understand, and I've heard different things, it sounds as if this intellectual vitality applies to all the students in the university. It's not really limited to it's not modules for the freshman class, right? It's essentially it's a smorgasbord of curiosity and questioning and open-mindedness for the whole community.
Yeah, students and faculty.
And faculty, of course. Yeah. Well, that goes without saying, right?
Faculty. Although like we have our work to do. No.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, Monica, so I know FAIR has been doing a lot of work in terms of curriculum in the K-12 space, preparing students for college. Maybe you can sort of talk about how that relates to the Harvard. Is the Harvard program the sort of follow-on that kind of FAIR envisions, or is it natural for some of the work you've been doing? And maybe you could just talk about sort of what's happening to to high school students as they go to college, when they go to college.
Right. Okay. So first of all, thank you all for having me here. It's so exciting to be part of this conversation and to get a sense of what's going on at Harvard now. I should say that I graduated from the law school in '91, which seems like the Jurassic era now, looking back. And I have to say, we encountered none of these issues. Maybe it's the graduate level was a little different. But even I graduated from Princeton. Back then, I did not see these issues at all, even on the horizon. So it's really, really, it's eye-opening to see not only what's happening, but how Harvard is the steps Harvard's taking to tackle this. And just to sort of add a little on John to the introduction you gave about FAIR, I just want to give people some background. So FAIR for All, as John said, is a nonpartisan civil rights organization. We're an advocacy organization. We were founded on I think, sort of a straightforward and urgent premise that some of the core principles underlying American democracy, the right to think freely, speak honestly, engage across differences, were coming under pressure, ironically, in the very institutions that were most responsible for upholding them. And we found this was happening not only in college campuses, but also even in K-12 schools and medicine and the arts. And that framing matters to us because we're not a conservative organization or a progressive one. That is really, really super important. We're nonpartisan, which means our North Star is equal protection and freedom of expression for everyone, regardless of where they stand politically or ideologically. We firmly believe that a healthy democracy and a pluralistic society depends on institutions, especially schools and universities, that teach people how to think, not what to think. And that how to think versus what to think is crucial now because we're seeing that distinction play out on campuses like Harvard. So getting to the work you referenced, John, our curriculum. So FAIR's flagship effort is a curriculum called Many Stories, One Nation. It's a high school ethnic studies curriculum that brings together diverse American voices. And very critically, and this makes our curriculum extremely unique, it teaches students that civil discourse skills they'll need to engage across real differences. Our curriculum has been validated by the Johns Hopkins School of Education. It meets ethnic studies standards for California and Oregon. We're rolling it out to other states as well. And that matters a lot to us because we want this work to be credible across the political spectrum. And I just say the thread connecting all of our work is a conviction that open inquiry isn't just an academic value, it's a profoundly democratic value. And that's why a conversation like the one we're having now feels extremely timely and one that FAIR needs to be part of. And I can go into more detail about the curriculum if you wanted me to. I wasn't sure if we were going to get to the other questions later, if I should just address the curriculum now. I don't know I don't know what our timing is.
Well, we got about a half an hour left. I think again an open discussion. I would like to leave enough time for us to talk about the challenges that they've facing at Harvard in terms of implementing the program. I'd also like to have a discussion about is it working? I mean,
Okay.
I know we've got. I'm sure if we, I'd like to sort of just get those perspectives as well. But
Okay, sure.
Monica, within that, I mean, I would love to kind of hear,
Yeah.
your thoughts. So
Perfect. So with that backdrop, I'll just say that what's unique about what we're trying to do with this curriculum, it's not just content, it's pedagogy. It teaches students to engage with primary sources, to hold competing interpretations in tension, to disagree respectfully and rigorously. So what we do is we furnish students with the foundational skills to engage meaningfully and respectfully across differences. For example, we teach them steel manning, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but as a recap, that's presenting the strongest version of someone else's argument before you respond to it. That's active listening to make sure you understand where they're coming from. So this is the opposite of straw manning, of course, which we see every day in public discourse in every outlet. Our curriculum also teaches star manning, which is something that one of our board of advisors, Angel Eduardo, actually created this framework. And it goes a step further than still manning. So star manning is acknowledging the good intentions and the positive values behind a position that you may disagree with. So in other words, it's, I can see that you care deeply about fairness, or I understand you're motivated by concern for community safety. And that automatically diffuses any disagreement and frames it in a more positive light. So it doesn't mean you agree with the other person. It means you're engaging with them as a human being, not as a caricature, which happens way too often now. Our curriculum teaches students to identify logical fallacies, ad hominem attacks, false dichotomies, slippery slopes, and the like. So, and crucially, they learn to spot these errors in arguments in their own thinking, not just in others. And this is a framework I'm particularly proud of. I think it's one of the most powerful ones in our curriculum. It's the competing goods framework. So by that, students learn that most controversies involve legitimate but conflicting values. And I think this understanding transforms how they approach disagreement, because this disconnect often fuels most of the divisive discourse we see. For example, safety versus freedom, individual rights versus community welfare. They're both good. It depends on your values. Not one is not more important than the other. Cultural preservation versus integration, which permeates our discussion of our conversations around immigration. So once students internalize this framework, it fundamentally changes how they approach these very difficult conversations, whether they're discussing policy or just in even personal debates. So this helps students stop trying to focus on like winning an argument and instead try to focus on understanding the values that the other side is protecting and defending. So that's in a nutshell what our curriculum is.
That's terrific. I mean, it sounds like the intellectual vitality initiative is consistent, at least consistent, and sort of is actually exemplifying all that. So that is, I think that's great. I mean, it's a lot better than what I was fearing, 3 or 4 years ago when I started getting involved and sort of seeing what was going on at Harvard. And I think Harvard has come a long way. So at least in my time.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Sure.
Just to tag. So, and the reason that we invested so much into this curriculum and this framework in particular is because we were seeing what was happening on college campuses like Harvard. And we realized that, maybe the solution is to tackle this problem earlier, upstream. So we believe that when students develop these vital skills in high school, that will make them much better prepared to engage in open discourse in college campus and work in the workplace and beyond. So what we're trying to do is help craft students and give them build better citizens so that when they arrive at Harvard, you won't have the problem that you're having now, if that makes sense.
Well, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Though it sounds, Monica, like colleges and like Harvard need to know how to capitalize on that. Because I think one thing that I feel like is missing among our faculty is a collective urgency about our collective mission.
Yes.
Like you will find lots of faculty who say, oh yeah, we teach our students to think critically. But one thing that you highlighted beautifully is that thinking critically is something that is something groups of people can do together. even and especially when they contain disagreement within them. And to succeed at that, you have to have certain social and emotional skills. Like I like to tell my students in my class, 90% of critical thinking is emotion regulation. No.
Very good.
And especially in the social setting. And I don't mean this to sound doom and gloom, but I don't think we on the Harvard faculty have done a very good job of thinking together about that. I think each of us individually will say, yes, I strive to teach my students to be better thinkers, to teach them how to think and not what to think. But what you're describing is like a way of approaching that foregrounds something that we often don't, which is that it's a social activity.
Yes. And ironically, it's weird. It's a social activity. Again, I'm dating myself. It's a social activity that I actively engaged in with my classmates 30 years ago. And it made all the difference in the world as a Gen Xer. It means that I'm able to have these same difficult conversations very often with people my age, but I don't think I could have them with younger people. Anyway.
Well, that's great. I think that's a terrific discussion. So I actually wanted to go back and talk about the challenges that intellectual vitality has faced. I assume there's been challenges. Maybe I'll start with Ari. I think you kind of maybe see it on the ground there, right? What sort of challenges have you seen? Has there been opposition? Are there people who kind of don't get with the program, and how do you deal with them?
Yeah, so I would say I want to pick up on what Ned was just talking about, and I think that sort of starts to address one challenge that we've had about sort of the balkanization of Harvard, and how that's been a little bit of a impediment, but we're sort of figuring out how to go through to work and bring and sort of recognize that intellectual vitality can be sort of the medium is the message, and that by like working collectively on these problems that we're actually that too is a form of solving them as well. But so that's one area that I'll go into in a little bit. And then the other one is about sort of how intellectual vitality was initially perceived and how that perception has changed over time. So just to return to what Ned started to talk about, I think that, there's this off-sided euphemism that at Harvard, every tub is on its own bottom. And so that basically describes that like within different schools at Harvard, everyone's sort of doing their own thing. And there's this like term one Harvard, but it doesn't actually often materialize. And so even within the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, like the every tub on its own bottom carries through to, faculty, students, administrators. But what this has done over time, and I alluded to this a little bit in the beginning, is to basically blunt each constituency's sense of what its role is in the larger university, such that it's very hard to invoke a sense of collective responsibility because everyone is so focused on their own sort of little sphere of fiefdom. So cultural change, like intellectual vitality, I think we learned early on and have continued to learn, has to actively work against that sort of balkanization. So I think that when the student board and the faculty board work together, what it does is it empowers students on the SAB the student advisory board, to assume more ownership of the academic culture, not just to be passive consumers of it. And I think it asks faculty to look beyond their own research and their classes to think about the larger learning community, and particularly as sort of Monica was talking about the formation of the intellectual virtues of their students. So intellectual virtues we refer to as humility, curiosity, diligence, things like that. So in that sense, it really asks all parties involved in intellectual vitality to lead by example, to show that the way we've been understanding our roles in the institution have become atomized and are really limited, and that we really have to get away from that. So I think that's something that we're still working on, because, this is, Clark Kerr wrote about this many, many years ago. This is just sort of a feature of the modern research university. And so working against that is very, very difficult, trying to get all these different groups to have one conversation instead of separate conversations. Okay, so that's one challenge. The other challenge, I think, is and I also can later on, if we have more time, give you an example of how that sort of collective action has worked in practice. The other issue is that I do think that there is, at least initially, there was this perception of intellectual vitality as a Trojan horse for, trying to bring more conservative viewpoints into the academy, or, sort of capitulating to the presidential administration's concerns. And I think a sort of willful willful ignorance about, oh, actually, intellectual vitality started far before any of this was in the news, and that really it is coming from ground up, from students, from faculty, and that we're not just talking about viewpoint diversity as an end. We're talking about it as a means towards better learning, research, and teaching. And so I think that has started to shift over time. I think more faculty are on board with this, but I think also a lot of how people feel about intellectual vitality is sort of where you stand depends on where you sit. And if for the people who think that everything was peachy with the research university and there were no problems, and that this is all just sort of like we're whipping up dust, but there's no problem here, then intellectual vitality kind of does seem like a slogan. But if you really do think, and I think many more people are increasingly finding, students and faculty and alumni, that there are real challenges that we have to we have to look them right in the eye, and that we can't become complacent about what has led us to this moment, then I think intellectual vitality is a really important vehicle for thinking about what the university owes to our democracy, owes to to forming young people, and to promoting research and scholarship that benefit us all.
So that's all really interesting. So let me kind of put together some random thoughts. So I've been hearing, because I'm not on the ground there, but that there have been different viewpoints that have been underrepresented at Harvard for the past few years. Conservative sort of being one group, but sort of more broadly speaking. So intellectual vitality is not intended to actually bring more conservatives or other groups, but to basically create an environment that makes it more welcoming to actually have different viewpoints. Because I have heard from people that there are groups that just didn't feel comfortable at Harvard and avoided, prefer to go some other institution. So it would be interesting to get, I don't know, any of your perspectives on that.
Well, I'll jump in a little bit on that. I think there are different related issues are underneath that question. So there was a heck of a lot more viewpoint diversity at Harvard than anybody was registering, precisely because we weren't actually good at having those rich conversations. So that was the point Ari was sort of making about the survey that I do at the beginning of class, which inevitably helps students realize, oh, like there is a bigger spectrum of opinion here than I perhaps realize. And then you have the job of actually turning that into an asset that we're all going to benefit from. So I think it's really important to say that. Because sometimes people think that the place is really monochrome. Like it's less monochrome than people think it is. But what we haven't done is really brought, all that conversation out and made it rich. Then the second thing I'll say is that I do think, intellectual vitality is absolutely about including, in a sense of academic standards, the idea that you always want to hear the best case for the person who disagrees most from you. And so to some extent, that does mean we have to think about conference invitations differently. We have to think about how we're admitting people to graduate school or hiring and things like that in such a way that we are really asking the question, like, are we creating the maximally broad intellectual space here? And that's not about ideology per se, though inevitably as a secondary consequence, there will be sort of aspects of ideological diversification that come in from taking as an academic standard the idea that you should have like maximal aperture for the best case arguments across the different sides of a debate.
Yeah, just to add one site where that's really important, syllabus design. So I think when I put a reading on a syllabus, I do not put it on there because I'm endorsing it. No, or say like this is the truth. I wouldn't give you anything but the truth. But students don't necessarily know that. And if I am teaching a course about controversial topics and I include readings on one side of that topic and fail to include readings like pushing like contrary viewpoints, that's a disservice to the students. No, and it's an easy mistake to fall into, I think. I'm a philosopher, so we tend to be allergic to doing that. We want to hear like arguments on all sides. But look, there's now data about this, not so much at Harvard, but across universities about like imbalance in syllabi. And that's a place where like you want to push for intellectual vitality, go ahead and like we hear lots of calls for hiring more conservative faculty members, whatever exactly conservative means. Maybe that's a good strategy to pursue. I don't know. It's very slow. Something that can happen much more quickly is faculty thinking together about whether their syllabi are really reflecting the very values Danielle just articulated. One other challenge, John, just to throw a bit of controversy into our discussion, we need a better administration. There are some bright points. For example, I think Amanda Klebaugh deserves real credit for being courageous about the goal of recentering academics. Grade inflation has come up for discussion before in my time at Harvard. I started here 20 years ago, but the prior iterations when it was discussed, it was all very hush-hush and like, oh, we're definitely not going to release data because that would be embarrassing, which is just rank cowardice. And there have been other like pretty shocking examples of cowardice at the level of administration and faculty members who are in a position of leadership, like the most obvious being the utter failure of the institution, of like key people in the institution to defend Carol Hooven when she was basically slandered by some students for her research on biological sex. Absolutely shocking and not an isolated incident either. So I think I just want to like throw that out there, maybe partly because this is a place where alums can exert some leverage too. We need administrators who are not craven. And some of our administrators in the past, to be honest, have been a bit craven. It's like, oh, there'll be controversy. My immediate goal is to tamp down the controversy, as opposed to saying, look, you know, the claim that there are two biological sexes, that defending that claim on scientific grounds does not make you, you know, a terrible person in any way. And our students need to remember that.
I will tell you, and I won't mention any names, but there was sort of an ostrich effect, I think, at Harvard. I mean, because I'm an alum and I kind of hear about these things. I would mention things to administrators who I think really did not know things that were happening. I don't think they were lying to me. I think it was just kind of the nature of the, you know, it's a big university, right? And people are doing their own things. But trust me, there are plenty of alums who are being very frank with administrators now, and will continue to be frank. So I appreciate that. But maybe can I just go back a second to I think your comments on syllabi are resonated because I was at a Heterodox Academy event recently, and they've done a study which seems to show growing imbalance in the syllabi. And I'm curious. I know it's not technically part. Is part of intellectual vitality helping faculty design syllabi that are more balanced, that sort of provide the different perspectives? And if that's the case, I'm just sort of curious how you're doing it. Whoever, I mean, I guess probably Danielle or Ned is probably best.
Or Ari, because there is a subgroup within the Student Advisory Board focused on pedagogy, but I don't know if they're focusing on, I mean, it's relatively a new subgroup, but maybe Ari, you could speak to that.
Yeah, well, so this one doesn't go, it goes to syllabi design. It doesn't go to sort of texts on and necessarily balance, but earlier when I was alluding to these collective action problems, one of them is that we have so our general education requirement split into 4 sections. One of the sections is the ethics and civics general education requirement. And right now we're in this like very bad, like low equilibrium where if one course decides that they are going to say no technology in a class or mandatory attendance, or, you're going to have regular exams or something like that, everyone will switch out of that class and take another class in the ethics and civics gen ed, and that class will be not have enough students to run. And so the issue is that we're like there wasn't sort of a group of faculty talking about instituting collective syllabi changes. So this spring, Ned and I were together to form, Ned's term is a cabal, a friendly cabal of ethics and civics faculty who are everyone who was teaching a course in that section this term, and students on the pedagogy working group for the student board, and faculty who are all teaching a class came together to draft a sort of list of different expectations and also a framing for why those expectations are in place that were going to be consistent across all the classes, so that no one could sort of like cop out of these of taking a course with these that were asking. I mean, it was pretty basic stuff too. It was like, come to class, don't use your phone, things like that. But I think we're moving towards that it was really well received by students, by faculty. I think we were able to get through it, and then students too have, I think, everyone who I've talked to who's taking one of these classes this semester has been really enjoying that extra sort of energy in the classroom. And so I think that also sets a blueprint for how we can begin to have bigger conversations about things like balance on syllabi and sections with teaching fellows who are graduate students, and these other sorts of balance questions. Yeah, I'm curious, Ned or Professor Allen. Sorry, I call Ned because he asked us all to call him Ned. So just in case anyone's worried about that. Yeah.
Just to jump in for a second here, I think it's a great question, John, and is a good pointer. I mean, we could be doing more in a formal way to have faculty come together and share learnings about pedagogy and pedagogic design that supports intellectual vitality. There have been informal exchanges of lessons and experiments and the like. I've heard about Ned's class sometimes, other people hear about my classes, things like that. But as a part of that conversation, I think it's also important that we recognize there's more than one strategy for supporting intellectual vitality in its fullest sense. When I say fullest sense, I mean including viewpoint diversity and that sort of wide aperture that I was talking about. Balance is one strategy. It's not always the strategy that you need. Not every class is appropriate for a person to balance. I speak as a political philosopher. When I'm teaching courses that are, in the area of my, contemporary normative work and expertise, it would be a slightly strange thing for me to pretend I didn't have a point of view. Like, there's just no way for me to even possibly pretend that I don't have a point of view. So in that case, for example, what I do is I try to embed debate practice and debate culture into the class. So that is that any given thing that's presented is always being challenged. And what I do very explicitly always is I don't let people choose the side they're debating on. It's random assignment. So sometimes they're ended up on a pro, sometimes they end up on a con, and so forth. And so that way, any kind of view that emerges is getting pressure tested honestly and fairly. So the point is just that balance is one strategy. Debate style, random assignment, pro and con, pressure testing of ideas is another strategy. And there's a long list. So I just wanted to make clear that we are learning things, and it would be very beneficial for us to kind of come together and name these different strategies and make them, in that regard, replicable across other classrooms.
Yeah. If I could offer an analogy, like when we're like being sort of brought up into an academic discipline as graduate students or as undergraduates and then graduate students, we get tons of a certain kind of training and acculturation. And in the best case, we get used to the idea that anything we produce as research is accountable, like we're accountable in our research to our peers. That doesn't mean that there's one way of doing research that you must follow if you're a philosopher. But whatever I do, produce as a philosopher, I should expect to have to justify my claims and to respond to criticism of it from other philosophers, but in a way that allows for a variety of like methods. Like there's not like one way to do philosophy. We lack that kind of culture with respect to teaching. It's kind of like a shocking secret about, or at least to people outside higher education, about higher education. We do not get the same kind of training as teachers or the same kind of acculturation where by the time you're a faculty member, you just take for granted that however you're teaching your material, you are broadly accountable to other colleagues for your teaching. And I think that's something that we should aspire to. No, the word accountable can make people nervous because it can suggest a top-down, like you shall teach this way. That's not the model at all. The model is more like we should be prepared to explain to our colleagues who are interested in what we're doing, what our vision is for what we want to accomplish in the classroom and how we're doing it, and be willing to listen to critical feedback about that.
So really more one of engagement rather than audit.
Yes, that's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
So no, that's terrific. And I guess I want to pick up on something Ned said a little while ago, and it's for Monica here. So how do now that he's pled for our alumni to get and be involved here, how do alumni groups like FAIR, like HAFS, what do we do? How do we support these sort of initiatives at Harvard and other universities?
Okay. Let's see. I'm just looking. Looks like I think I have enough power in my laptop. I thought I charged it overnight, but didn't. So I said start by saying that civics-oriented organizations like FAIR, we can really do something that I guess universities sometimes find it difficult to do themselves. And that's we can say plainly what's at stake, and we can say it from outside the institution. We're more empowered. Universities are complex ecosystems. There's lots of competing pressures, donor relationships, faculty governance, student activism, and then public perception, optics. And that makes it, I think, often with the administrators I've talked to, higher ed administrators, it's very difficult for them. It's genuinely difficult for them to draw clear lines around expression and open inquiry without triggering a political response from one direction or another. So I think this makes organizations like FAIR uniquely suited and empowered to frame these principles, not as partisan positions, but as foundational commitments. We keep going back to that, as Danielle said, pluralistic, commitments that protect everyone, regardless of where they sit on the political or ideological spectrum. Equal protection and free speech aren't left or right values; they're constitutional values. And I think it's really helpful when that idea is reinforced from outside, so that it's not coming from within. The students understand, wait, this is bigger than the university. This is a societal issue we're talking about. So the partnership question, I think, I find that pretty exciting, because I think there are a few areas where that partnership can be especially valuable. So one is legal and institutional support, which FAIR has routinely provided to students over the past few years, and especially since October 7th, when there was a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism on campus. So when students encounter real resistance to open inquiry, it helps to have organizations outside of the school that have legal infrastructure in their corner to advocate for them and to protect their rights. So connecting students to legal resources we found is extremely important, so that students have the options for recourse when they feel their freedom of expression is at stake. And another is scale. I'd say a student initiative like the one we're dealing with here is almost by definition rooted in one place. Civil society organizations like FAIR can help document what's working and carry it over from Harvard to other campuses, so we can scale that work. And what organizations like FAIR also do is bring a broader network, legal and research infrastructure, and the ability to connect our local efforts and communities to a national conversation about what education is for. What is the goal of education? We keep going back to this. It's critical thinking. It's not teaching kids what to think, or young people. It's teaching them how to think. So I think all of this is genuinely complementary. And then, of course, there's the pipeline question, which I addressed earlier, which is making sure organizations like FAIR can make sure that students arrive on college campuses ready and equipped with the civil discourse skills that they need to be productive members of a pluralist society. And I guess lastly, I think the most important role an organization like FAIR plays is just giving people permission to raise those uncomfortable questions and to disagree with a professor and say, I'm not sure I agree with the framing here. It's important that they arrive on campus with the ability to exercise that right. One of the things I hear most from students and educators is that they didn't realize that others felt the same way they did. And normalizing that, showing that it's not just acceptable, but valuable to think for yourself. I think that's something that civics-oriented organizations like FAIR can do in ways that institutions like Harvard probably can't.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
If I may just pick up on, so there's the pipeline of students, but there's also the pipeline of faculty. And it's a weird thing for me to be doing that, but I just want to say that, Professor Hall and Professor Allen are the most incredible faculty I've ever had. I've been in both of their classes, but they are not, they are a minority. People like them are a minority in the university. And I think it's really, it's a kind of luck for students if they end up with a professor who's takes them seriously, as both these professors have taken me seriously. And I think we really have to do more to make sure that starting in college, that students who are interested in, getting their PhD or interested in staying in the academy are being trained and are being mentored in a way that they come to see their research and their scholarship in this very holistic sense. And that people like Professor Allen, Professor Hall have the resources that they need to be able to help the faculty pipeline. So there are more people like them to carry on the academy, and more people like them in positions of administration and leadership.
Well, it's quite a testimonial. Thanks for that. I'm mindful of the fact that we only have really just a couple of minutes left. So I think two things. If there are any concluding thoughts, anybody can sum up in literally seconds. And I think if anybody wants to know more about intellectual vitality, what is the best source of information?
I'll just say thank you for convening us. This was a really good conversation to have. So I appreciate the invitation. And those are my brief concluding thoughts.
Very classy, Danielle. Thank you. So, Ari, what do you recommend if someone wants to know more about intellectual vitality, or Ned, or what?
First point would just be the website, right? Don't you think? Because you'll get a very good sense of the mission and of a number of the initiatives, like events that have been put on.
Okay, that's great. Is there like is there a flyer? Is there a circular? Is there a booklet? I mean, I know I get all kinds of stuff from Harvard, different different publications, but I've never seen anything from the Intellectual Vitality Initiative.
There is a newsletter you can sign up for from the website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And you can
Great.
there's an email and a contact for all of those things. And then, of course, I think my email and Ned's email and Professor Allen's email, they're all on.
Well, I don't want
to. We don't have a snazzy brochure yet. We probably should.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to make this. I want to make this institutional, because it shouldn't all just be on. I'm sort of big on the kind of institutionalization of these kind of things, as opposed to relying on particular individuals. But I appreciate that. Yeah. So look,
also not a bad idea for people who are curious to reach out to our dean, like Hopi Hoekstra, and say, "Can you tell me more about the things?" Because she, officially, she's in charge of it all.
Officially.
I think Hopi didn't have enough stuff to do, but we'll add that.
But she has been very, she convened the civil discourse advisory group too. So she's, I didn't mean that to sound as smart as it did, but because I think it is something that, among the many things that are on her plate, is something that the sort of building the better culture is something that's important to her, and she'll have the 30,000-foot view.
Okay. Well,
John, can I
yes,
I thank you so much for hosting this, such an important conversation, again, really timely. And for any educators or parents of high school age children out there who might be interested in learning more about the work fairs during our curriculum, it's our website's very easy to find, ministoriesonenation.com. You'll find all the unit outlines, sample lessons, and just to give everyone a little bit more of an idea of what we're doing.
Great. Thanks, Monica.
Sure.
So look, I'm going to draw it to a close. Thank you all for really a terrific discussion. It's unfortunate that we only had an hour, because I really think I could have easily gone on for a day here. So I want to thank all of you, all of the panelists. I want to thank everybody who watched and will be watching. This will be recorded. I especially want to thank all the people who provided the financial support needed to supply programming like this. I encourage everybody to follow all of our organizations and the Intellectual Vitality Initiative, and to learn more about how civil discourse, open dialogue, and open inquiry are being advanced at Harvard. So if you have any questions regarding today's program or any other issues, please reach out to us. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you all. Really terrific.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.